by Riverside.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to LeadHERShip Bytes podcast, where we share the inspiring stories of current and emerging women leaders from diverse backgrounds, industries, and career stages. Today, Dr. Nicole Bryan joins us on the podcast. Dr. Nicole is an executive leadership career strategist whose focus is helping women break through to the next level and lead boldly. Dr. Nicole runs her own firm titled The Change Doc, and she's earned her doctorate of philosophy and counseling psychology, also a master's of education in counseling and personnel services, an MBA, another master's of industrial and labor relations, and she brings 20 plus years of experience as the head of leadership development in Fortune 500 companies. So you all know that we love all things leadership, all things career focused on this podcast. So I am very pleased to have Dr. Nicole with us today to share her journey and insights. Welcome, Dr. Nicole.
Thank you, Kim. I'm very excited to be here.
Thank you. So let's jump right in. You have a very diverse background. You have earned multiple degrees. You have been on quite the leadership journey at some very large organizations. Tell us about how your leadership journey began.
So that's a very interesting question. The first thing I thought of when you asked about where my leadership journey began, honestly can trace it all the way back to like elementary school. That might sound weird for a lot of us, but when I think about leadership, obviously now in our professional lives, we think about leadership in, leading teams, leading yourself in a professional setting. But when I think about the origins of my leadership journey, I would say it started on the block. I was a kid in Brooklyn, New York, and, you have your friend group there. I have my best friend across the street and, good girlfriends on the same block, down the block. I think if you're able to remember those olden days, you can either see snippets of yourself as being a leader, or you can see yourself kind of being the front runner. And if I think about my friend group growing up on the block, I would say I was a front runner. I was probably a quiet leader at that point in time, maybe leading more with my actions than necessarily my words or, inspiring others. But that's probably where I can trace it all the way back to. And then obviously, over time, as I became comfortable in my own skin and accepted things about who I was and how I showed up, then that kind of transpired to me, being a leader in, my school environments. So even all the way through college, I joined a sorority, but I was probably the quietest of my entire sorority, my entire chapter. I'm still probably the quietest out of them, but I would say one of the most respected. So I think leadership just shows up, it's a pattern that shows up in different ways.
In doing some research for the podcast, I noticed that your practice in particular focuses on helping introverted women. Why is that a passion for you?
I have always been an introvert. I was that kid who my mom used to have to pry the books out of my hands to go outside. Like she used to physically push me out the front door so that I could go outside and play versus stay home and stay in my books. And when I say books, I mean not necessarily educational books. I just love to read, and I would just lose myself in, novels and things like that. But I chose to help introverted women for a variety of reasons. One is because when I think about women, even in this day and age, right, I think a lot of our foremothers did a lot of groundwork for us to be able to have choices in terms of what we want to do for a living. Right? Less than, 40, 50 years ago, that was not a case. We didn't really have any choices. So now we have lots and lots of choices. But with choices comes a lot of responsibility. And so one of the roles that I play for my clients is helping them figure out what they want to do with all the choices that they have. this point in time. Another reason that I chose to help women in particular is because despite all of the advancements that we've had over the last century, the truth of the matter is inequality still exists for us as women, right? We don't earn the same amount of money that our male counterparts do. We don't hold positions of power in the same number as our male counterparts do. Particularly when it comes to getting into the executive level, 50% of the global workforce are women, 25% are leaders, and then less than 15% of executive level positions around the world are held by women. So those numbers are not equitable in any shape, form, or fashion. And the story that it tells is that we still live in a very patriarchal, heavy society. And men
Yes.
are still running the workplaces that we're in. And frankly, as long as that happens, we'll never have big things like pay equity, nor small things like dedicated rooms where we can, express milk for our children who we leave at home to be cared for by somebody else because we got to make a paycheck. So that is why I've chose to help women get to the executive level. For the introvert part, honestly, it's a purely selfish reason, which is I'm an introvert, and coming up in the professional setting, I didn't see a lot of introverted people, let alone introverted women. And so I think there is something to that quieter leadership abilities and styles that is often underestimated, but is powerful. So a lot of the work that I do is I help women position themselves, use their introverted capabilities and strengths to take their career as far as they want to take it.
I love that. So can you share a memorable moment? Now, this is going to probably take you back a little bit, but when you first felt empowered as a leader to help other leaders, like when did you know that this was the path?
You know what? I have plenty of ideas. I used to work for a nonprofit organization. It was actually the first nonprofit that I ever worked for. Um, in that nonprofit was not an executive, but I was a leader. So I was responsible for multiple office locations. And I was also the only person of color in a leadership role. And by default, many people sought my advice. By default, in terms of the role that I had, as well as being the only person of color, many of the employees, the team members in the nonprofit would come to me for advice in my official capacity and my unofficial capacity. And I think that it was in that moment where I actually first saw myself as a leader of leaders. It was the first time I also felt the ethical responsibility, not one that was given to me by the company, but the ethical responsibility to help other people who looked like me or who had similar challenges to me kind of navigate their path. And it was also the first time I had a conflict between the leadership hat I was wearing for the organization that I was representing and then the leadership hat I was wearing for the community that I represented. If that right. So,
That's
and
good.
they always didn't align, right? So there were times where I was giving advice from Nicole, not Nicole, the leader in this company. And it made me really think about what I wanted to do and where I wanted to do it, like how I really wanted to help the people that were my colleagues, my peers, and then people who were coming behind me.
Yeah, and are there things that you reflect back on and wish you had known before you step into leadership roles? And if so, what are some of those things?
So the first thing that popped in my mind as you asked that question was the responsibility of it. It's a heavy cross to bear, frankly. It's not for everybody. It depends on how you lead and where you lead. But for me in particular, I love working in large corporate settings. I love working in organizations. And I'm sure that many can relate to that. But when I think about, for example, my entrepreneurial sisters, people who prefer to be out on their own, it may be difficult for them to imagine, because we hear a lot of negative things, for example, about working in large organizations. And the truth is, no work setting is perfect. There's challenges to both on both sides of the coin. But I think about if I would have known, if I would have known how much of a responsibility I would take on in terms of being kind of that intermediary between large organizations and individuals who are trying to find themselves and take care of themselves in large organizations. Honestly, I might have chosen a different path because that's a huge, huge responsibility. And I take it very seriously. The other thing I would say, this is probably going to sound weird after you gave me that lovely, lovely introduction in all of my degrees and credentials. But if I had to do it over, I probably would not go for half of those degrees.
Really?
Yes,
Why?
yes, Cam, yes, yeah. Listen, most of those degrees I got honestly because I wanted to do that for my family. So I was the first, like many listeners here, I was the first in my family to go to college, let alone finish a degree. My dad had a sixth grade education. My mom barely finished high school. And I remember thinking and promising my dad that I would represent him and take my education as far as I could take it, which I did, right? And I don't regret that. I pursued those degrees for reasons other than my professional life, which is fine. But the reason why I said I probably wouldn't do it again is because what I've learned is after working in a corporate setting and working in organizations for 30 plus years at this point in time, I've learned more on the job than I ever learned in any classroom. But
So
I didn't
powerful.
know that back then. And so I've learned more on the job than I did in any classroom. And honestly, all those degrees, they racked up debt. So if I would have known not to rack up debt to get those degrees, that would have given me an even better financial head start, or a head start to financial freedom, right? I have that now, but I didn't have it then. And so that's another thing that I think I would have shifted. Not that I wouldn't have gone and gotten education. I think many of us over-educate ourselves and often use education as a crutch, or a way to, make ourselves feel like we belong in the corporate and nonprofit environments that we find ourselves in. And so it took me a while to realize I belong with or without, 6 degrees essentially, and a lot of financial debt to go along with it.
You highlight that because the Society for Human Resource Management, for a while now, has actually been heavily pushing more experience and skills based hiring. And for some of the very reasons that you mentioned around, first of all, giving people an opportunity. So there's an equity part of that as well. And everybody doesn't have access to that without, like you said, accumulating debt. I can certainly identify with that and everything that you said, that you said. So how did you work through that? Was there a point at which you got that next degree and you say, okay, this is enough already? What made you feel like you had finally reached that point where it was enough?
Honestly, for my education, a couple of things happened. I got to a point where I was no longer paying for it, right? So I was pursuing new degrees, but I wasn't paying for it anymore. My company was paying for it or something like that. Another benefit, by the way, of working in a corporate setting, those ancillary benefits. So that happened. And I want to be clear, I'm not saying that those things are not valuable. They are. What I've learned is that they are not more valuable than experience. They can give you a leg up, but they can't get you over the threshold, essentially. And so for me, I started being very clear about why I was going after the degree. What I was starting to be honest with myself about why I was making the decisions I was making. Because in some instances, for some of those degrees, I worked full time and went to school full time. For some of the degrees, I had to stop working full time, right? So when I pursued my PhD, Many PhD programs will tell you that you cannot work while you're taking courses in the PhD program. Some do, but some don't. So I had to stop working, stop bringing in a very good income, go back to be a broke student for several years. And there's all these trade-offs when you do that type of thing. So for me, I got to a point where I just started being honest about the why. Why am I pursuing this degree? Is it really because it's going to get me a better job? No, because honestly, you could get a good job or a better job without pursuing another degree. It was two things. One, wanting to do it for my dad. And then two, honestly, insecurities or lack of confidence, I should say, in terms of what I wanted to accomplish for myself.
Those are so powerful, powerful insights. Thank you for being so open and transparent about that. I know that's going to help somebody. Because I'm sitting here listening and thinking, examine those motives. Like really, nothing wrong with
Yeah.
wanting to
Yeah.
learn, but what's
Yeah.
the motive behind it, right?
Yeah.
So that
Yeah.
leads me to another question about mentorship and supporting and uplifting other women. As you grew in the corporate space, were you mentored and sponsored? I want to add that because a lot of women are over mentored, but we're not sponsored. And it creates a gap in terms of being able to advance into leadership. What was that experience like for you? How do you feel it added to your capacity as a leader?
Yes. So, full transparency, I was more sponsored than I was mentored. And it's probably one of the reasons why now with my clients, I push them to secure sponsorship versus mentorship. Neither one of them are paid roles per se. But sponsorship is when you have a informal contract with someone who, and it usually is a person within your organization. It could be someone within the industry that you're in, but they are in a position of power. So maybe they're in a higher ranking role or they're in a role within your company that has a lot of influence over decision making. And basically that sponsor, you can think of them as like your spokesperson. Like when you are not at the table or when your career or opportunities are being discussed where you might be a viable candidate, that sponsor is constantly has you on their mind. They're putting you up and praising your capabilities. They're basically advocating for you at all times when you are unable to advocate for yourself. So that's a sponsor. A mentor is someone who's usually in the same field that you might be in. You guys already have something major in common. So maybe the specialty area, or maybe that person did the role that you were in before. Unlike the sponsor, they have less influence per se over decision making that's happening within the organization, but they have an experience that you want. So they are kind of teaching you informally about what you need to do or how you need to do something to be able to advance your career. But you can see the difference. The sponsor usually is in a position of power and influence, and they use their power and influence on your behalf. A mentor is usually teaching you, giving you, sharing some knowledge and experience that you can benefit from in order to kind of move your career along. But Cam, to answer your question, I didn't really have many mentors, but I did have a lot of sponsors. And I had both female and male sponsors. And I had Caucasian, Indian, Black. My sponsors look like the United Nations. And I would love to say that
Love
I
that.
initially, I initially planned it that way. I didn't initially plan it that way, but I immediately saw the value in it, making sure I had diversity in terms of my professional support system. I've been talking a lot lately with everyone that will listen in terms of how, particularly for women, how the words, things like power and wanting to be rich, things that we think about, but don't always talk about openly because society makes us feel very ashamed of it. If you're a woman, you shouldn't be why do you need power? That is a masculine trait. And money, well, money's filthy. Why would you want to be rich? Why can't you just make ends meet or have just enough? When we want excess of enough, we feel a certain amount of shame and we don't talk about it openly because we know people are going to judge us, right? It's all those kind of things kind of get upon us. But I will say that my sponsors are the ones who helped me to crystallize my ultimate goals and encouraged me to not only pursue them, but they physically and metaphorically opened the doors for me to get access to those things. Yeah.
That's so good. Oh my goodness. So look, the questions are popping in my head as you're talking. I love this because this is a rare conversation where we really talk about sponsorship, particularly among women of color, right? It's
Yeah.
not a conversation that we hear very often. How did you go about getting sponsors? Because people will mentor you out the wazoo, but those sponsors, it's like, how do you approach that conversation?
Yeah. So I'm so glad you asked. And, you're right. First of all, there's not a lot of forums where we can talk about these things openly. And I think the truth is people gatekeep. When I think about executives and other leaders, they may have found a path for themselves, but everybody's not willing to share how they got there. And then we're not making it any better for the people who are trying to come up or better themselves or create a path for the next generation. So I got a little gangster, meaning I used what I learned on the streets to help me to get to the executive level and in my career, right? And it took me some time to get even comfortable doing that. I would say, Kim, probably for the first 10, maybe even 15 years of my career, I was pretending to be someone that I'm not. It didn't even dawn on me that what I learned in the streets of Brooklyn could actually benefit me in a corporate setting or whatever type of workplace that I was finding myself in. So it started clicking for me. I could actually use my strategic brain to do something similar in the corporate environment, not in terms of doing anything illegal or anything like that, but literally planning and thinking about what step I need to take, who I need to have in my corner. All of that requires strategic planning. And I think one of the things that we don't do, or we don't even think to do, is to leverage all the skills we've gathered just to survive in the hood or in our families. Like, most family dynamics are not cookie cutter clean. We are literally navigating a lot of stuff on a day-to-day basis, but we don't think about how we can leverage those same communication skills, relationship skills, negotiation skills, conflict management skills that we leverage every day with our families, our friends, etc. We don't think how that automatically transfers into the corporate setting or into the nonprofit setting, right? That was one thing. The second thing, in terms of how I secured my sponsors, it dawned on me to start thinking strategically, I started to look around and see who in this company got it going on. Who in this company is doing the things that either I want to do, or, for example, I am a human resources professional. Maybe they weren't in human resources. Maybe they were in marketing or product management, but they had the respect and the influence that I wanted. So what are they doing? How did they get there? What are they doing? I was able to see what they were doing and see the impact. I would watch behaviors, see the impact. I would listen to how people were talked about, because everybody's talking about something. And usually, hopefully, they're talking about you in a positive way. And I could hear that all those kind of factors helped me to decide who I wanted to align myself with. So that was the second step. The third step was, once I had figured out who I wanted to align myself with, I had to figure out how to get an audience with them. In some cases, I was already working on a project with them. I didn't have a relationship with them, but I already was in meetings where they were also in meetings, or, I would see them speak and do presentations in different settings. If that was the case, then I would broker an introduction. If my boss knew this person, I'd be like, hey, can you introduce me to Frank? Because, I'm interested in such and such he's doing. Or sending them a quick email to be like, hey, I heard you're working on so-and-so project. I'm interested in that. You got 15 minutes to kind of share. Like, that's what I call a soft intro. You either know someone who knows them, or you're already in a similar setting and they know who you are. They might not care who you are at the point, but they know who you are. So you sending them a message isn't like a cold email. It's literally they know who you are. So they'll recognize your name. There's been times, though, I will say, where had sponsors who, before becoming my sponsors, didn't know who the hell I was. And that's the time where I kind of threw my pride to the side and just fell on the sword, right? I basically was very courageous. I fall on the sword and be like, listen, I know you don't know. I'll say it. I know you don't know who the hell I am, but this is what I'm trying to do. And this is why I'm interested in talking to you. Would you spare 15, 30 minutes with me? Whatever. I could take you to coffee. We could go for a walk. I can meet you at the bar downstairs. Doesn't matter. I just need 15, 30 minutes of your time. But the key there, though, is being honest. I think many of us make the mistake of, I can do for you, you can do for me. Listen, when you go on after a sponsor who's like 2, 3 levels your senior and the tail end of their career, you're at the beginning or the middle, can you help each other? Sure, but they can help you much more than you can help them. And I think just being honest about that is very endearing to that potential sponsor. And I haven't come across a person yet who doesn't want to help, right? I've never approached someone and they'll be like, nah, son, I'm not checking for you. I don't know you. I don't want to help you. The truth of the matter is everybody's busy. So I have come across where I've made a pitch for sponsorship and they've been honest. Like, I would love to help you, but I truly can't because of whatever. But because they want to help, it's very rarely no. It's usually no, I'm probably not the right person because of these reasons. I know so-and-so. Let me introduce you to her or to him, and let's see if that might be a better connection. So hopefully those steps help shows the kind of the path that I took. But I think truly for me, it was first starting to think very strategically about who could actually help me and then getting the courage to be able to execute on that.
That is such a rich answer. And again, I'm going to have to listen to this all over again because there is so much you are dropping so much wisdom here that I have to unpack and process. This is so good. But I'm curious right now because I think we are in a very unique time in the workforce right now where we have multiple generations in the workforce at the same time. And people are just trying to figure out how to maneuver, how to work together. And what we are seeing, at least in the nonprofit space, is that there is a declining interest right now in leadership. So I'm curious what you think about what current leaders, regardless of generation, could and should be doing to be more supportive of emerging leaders and to help regenerate interest in that leadership pipeline.
First of all, I think it's an interesting phenomenon that's happening. And I think there's many reasons why that is, why that is occurring. But in terms of what we who are existing leaders can do to help emerging leaders, one thing in particular is I think historically leadership, particularly executive leadership, but leadership in general, has been like a mystery. Leadership in organizations, right? It's like this secret society or something where for decades has been held almost like a holy grail where you got to be in the inside club or a special crew to even be considered for leadership. And there was a lot of secrecy around it. If there's something I think that we who are existing leaders can do to help drum up more interest in the generations that are coming up is to demystify what leadership is holistically, but also in our individual organizations. Because I think that the generations that are coming into the workforce now, they don't succumb to that kind of clubbish or cliquish facade. What I've found is that many of the young people who are coming into the workforce now, they're very much about advocating for equitable access to everything. And if they think leadership is only about hierarchy or only about elitism in a negative way, then they're by default not going to be interested in it. I have the privilege of working with women who span the various different generations that are currently in the workforce. In the conversations that I'm having, you can tell what aspects of leadership they are attracted to versus which aspects of leadership they are not. And those who are in their like 20s now, for example, those who are motivated to be leaders, it's because they are committed to breaking down what they perceive as either poor leadership or leadership that tries to separate people from their values, etc. And so what I'm finding is that the younger leaders are very value driven, and they don't have to succumb to what their organization says leadership is. You get to define it for yourself. That's number one. And then two, we as existing leaders, we can help them connect their value system to what they can do as a leader, like how they can create the change that they want to see. I think that would help close the gap and spark more interest in that generation's abilities to become strong leaders for today and for tomorrow.
Yeah, awesome. And is there any advice that you would give women in leadership right now about having staying power?
Cam, listen, girl, y'all can't see her, but she's chuckling over here as I am. Like, listen, I have so much to say on this. First of all, let me just admit, this is my life's work, right? Like making sure that women stay in leadership roles. And it goes back to what I said previously. If we don't have women in leadership roles, then everything that we've worked for, our foremothers have worked for, starts to actually crumble. And so the stats all say is very clear that women for the past 5 years have been exiting the not the workforce, but nonprofits, corporations, small companies, mid-sized companies. Women, particularly Black women, have been exiting at ridiculous rates, those types of formal work environments. I have something to say about that because one, I understand why. Like it is not easy. It is not easy to, as a woman, as a person of color, Black woman, we are the most educated and amongst the lowest paid, or lowest recognized for our contributions. And if you're an introvert on top of that, forget about it. Like it's like triple, quadruple whammy that's working against you in the informal settings. However, this is what I will say. The truth of the matter is, as many women who are leaving and starting to try to set up their own companies, the system won't work if we all exit. So this is what I say to my clients all the time. If we all exit, if we all left and tried to be entrepreneurs, who's hiring the sisters? Our entrepreneurship dollars depend on what the corporations are doing, whether you have a direct contract with the company, whether you are selling your services to individual people. Well, the individual people are getting salaries from the company. Like the economy will stop working if we don't have representation, women and women of color inside the formal organizations as well as on the entrepreneurial side. So when I talk to my clients and any opportunity I have to stand and talk to women leaders in particular, I just talk about the very true fact that no work setting, whether you work for yourself or you work for someone else, is perfect. You just have to get really, really clear about what you value and the type of setting in which you thrive. I, for example, know I thrive working with other people. I am an introvert, but I know that my best ideas, my best work product, the way I like feeling a part of a team. So working in a company or a nonprofit or a small mid-sized organization, I feel good there. I don't let the rhetoric of corporations are bad or, working for somebody else is hard. Yeah, all of that. It probably is. But guess what? The other side is not sweeter unless your values align to them. So I'm always encouraging people to really think about what they want and what they need before following the trend that might be in play for, this decade or, these last 3, 4, 5 years. I don't even know if I answered your question, Cam, but
No, you did.
okay.
No, you did. I
Going
love
on a
it.
tangent,
It was
but
I was just about to say, no, no, because I have something to piggyback on that actually. Speaking of following the trends, I'm curious what trends you are observing right now around career and leadership development. So, what are you seeing? And also, another one, so I'm going to give you a two-parter. The other piece of that is, in addition to what you're seeing, I'd love to know what you think are the skills that women need to focus on developing right now. What's in demand?
okay. So it's funny because myself and I have a couple of other partners that we're talking about this a lot at this point in time. The trend I am seeing, believe it or not, and I think it really does have to do with the newcomers to the workforce, is a trend in terms of leadership and the demand for feminine leadership skills. So let me just clarify. So feminine leadership skills is not necessarily about womanhood or being a female. Feminine leadership skills is essentially leading in a way that is not necessarily top down or aggressive, but more so we are seeing that across the multi-generational workforce, people are more receptive to being led by collaboration, by increased communication, by shared responsibility, by creating community, even within an organization, really leveraging teamwork versus individual rewards and things like that. Those are all aspects, by the way, of feminine leadership. So a man can lead with feminine leadership strength, a woman can lead with feminine leadership strengths, but that's a huge trend. There's been articles in Forbes and Fortune and all of these major magazines talking about and presenting business case around how feminine leadership traits are on the rise, which is very interesting to think about, particularly in male dominated industries like financial services, the tech world. Even though they are male dominated industries, employees are basically demanding that and causing leaders, no matter what age group you're in, to have to shift how they lead. So that's a huge, huge trend that's happening right now. If I had to think about skills that I would always advise, and I do this with my clients as well, and remember, I work with women leaders who they're either middle managers or maybe director, or senior director, or VP. They want to get to an executive VP or chief, whatever, right? The skills that I work on them with are a couple of things. One is there's always communication. Let's just lay that on the line. All of us have an opportunity to be more effective communicators. But putting that aside, the other thing that I work with them on is building business cases. I have found many women are really good at coming up with big ideas, but they're not as good at selling those ideas. And so when it comes to selling those ideas, that means you have to put together a good business case. That means you have to use data, whether it's qualitative data or quantitative data. That means you have to be an excellent storyteller. It means that you have to be a relationship broker, because the truth of the matter is, no matter how good of an idea you have, getting the buy-in for that idea and then executing that idea, very rarely can you do it alone. You're going to need other people, other experts to help you bring your idea to fruition. And you can only do that through relationship building. And so that's one skill, building business cases rather than leading with our either our emotions or leading with, well, it's the right thing to do. Maybe it's about putting out a new product or, putting together a employee group for DEI. Most women would say it's the right thing to do. And it is. But we also know that organizations exist because they either make money or they make an impact or they do both. And so you got to be able to articulate how what you want actually accomplishes the same goals that the organization or helps the organization further what they want. So building the business case, that's one skill set. Another skill set is knowing how the business works. So what I've found in the women that I have worked with, I should say, is that they are very knowledgeable about their subject matter expertise. So for example, I mentioned before that I work in human resources. That's my subject matter expertise. When I come across other people who work in human resources, they know human resources. Like they can tell you every aspect, everything that you need to know about how human resources works. But when I ask them, how does the business work? What is the business of the organization that you work in? How does it make money? How does it make an impact in the community? What are the products? How does the widget get from A to in the pocket of the customer? Everyone is not able to answer those questions. They have a general sense, but knowing intricately, the higher you move up in an organization in terms of leadership, the broader your responsibilities become, right? You're no longer able to only be a subject matter expert, because the higher you move up in an organization, you are more accountable for either multiple teams, multiple functions, or if you make it to the executive suite, you're accountable for the entire business. It doesn't matter what your discipline is. The decisions that you are making at the executive table affect the entire business. And when you don't know how the business works, you are likely to make decisions that have a negative impact on the business versus a positive impact. We talked earlier about positioning yourself with power and influence. The more you know how the business works, the more you can position yourself with power and influence, because you can talk intelligently to anybody else about the whys, not just the what you want, but the how to do it, because you know how the business works, and the why you want to do it, because you know how the business works. And I think many of the women that I work with don't start out knowing how the business works, and that negatively impacts them in terms of being able to position themselves as someone who should be looked at as having leadership or executive potential. So those are two skill sets I think we don't talk about enough. Yes, we talk about communication. Clearly, we talk about influencing skills. But I would say focus on learning how to build a business case and focus on understanding how your business works, because those two things can really springboard you to what you want to ultimately accomplish for yourself in terms of your career.
Listeners, if you listen to this podcast on a regular basis, you know it is very rare that I am ever speechless. That I am ever speechless. And I am just speechless with the wisdom and the insights and the knowledge that have been dropped on the show. I feel so fortunate, Dr. Nicole, to have had you as our guest today. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. I'm the
Wonderful,
fortunate
wonderful.
one. You invited me, so I think I'm the fortunate one. But
Listeners, if you are looking for that way to take your career to the next level, and you need coaching, you need career advice and guidance, you need to reach out to the Change Doc, Dr. Nicole. And as I put that out there, I'm going to ask you, Dr. Nicole, what is next for you? Is there anything that you have gone on that you want to share with our listeners about the important work you're doing, any upcoming initiatives, and how should people get in contact with you? How can they find you?
yeah, I'm not sure when this episode will drop, but I am currently working on with two other women to host a first ever Black Women Lead First is the name of our conference. And so that's happening in a few weeks. Even if it's after the date that we host that, the trainings will be available as well. So blackwomenleadfirst.com is a place to go if you are a Black woman and you are interested in feminine leadership in particular to advance your career and to become a strong leader. Other than that, I would invite everyone who is listening to, if you're listening to this podcast with Cam, then you must be, like me, a huge podcast listener. And so I have a podcast as well. And so I have a weekly podcast where I talk about many of the topics that Cam and I were able to talk about here and more. So if you're an introverted woman who is looking to be the best leader she can possibly be, and you are interested in taking your career to the executive level, then my podcast, Leading Her Way, which is available on any platform that you listen to past podcasts on, is available. And I think it's just what you want and what you need.
Love it. Leading Her Way podcast. I will be leading my way to make sure that I subscribe to that podcast and tune in. And listeners,
Oh,
you know my philosophy. There is room at the table for all of us. So yeah, so I invite you to pull up a seat at Dr. Nicole's table and get some of this good wisdom that we got today on a regular basis. So thank you so much, Dr. Nicole, for sharing with us, taking time out
absolutely.
of your schedule. Thank you so much. And listeners, thank you again. We will be back in 2 weeks with another episode of Leadership Bites. Have a great one.